In 1944, as the war in Europe entered its final and most punishing phase, the German army believed it was no longer discovering the nature of warfare, but merely enduring its final tests. Years of brutal combat across Poland, France, the Balkans, North Africa, and the Eastern Front had shaped an officer corps that considered itself hardened beyond surprise. German commanders did not believe they were fighting an unknown future. They believed they were managing a deteriorating present. The fundamentals, in their view, had already been proven. Modern war had been mastered, codified, and demonstrated under fire. Speed, discipline, coordination, and decisive action. These were the elements that had once shattered entire nations in a matter of weeks. And although the balance of resources had shifted, German officers remained confident that they still understood how armies functioned under pressure, how command structures failed, and how enemies ultimately revealed their weaknesses. This confidence framed how German intelligence viewed the United States. To German analysts, the American army was not mysterious. It was new, large, and powerful, but conceptually familiar. Intelligence briefings described it as an industrial force, assembled rapidly, trained efficiently, and equipped lavishly. Its strength lay in mass and production, not in refinement. German officers believed that once American troops faced sustained pressure, once conditions deviated from scripted plans, their lack of deep military tradition would become apparent. They expected hesitation. They expected over-reliance on orders. They expected a force that required constant direction from above, because that was how armies, proper armies, were supposed to function. What German intelligence did not anticipate was that the Americans were not trying to build a European-style army. They were building a system. This misunderstanding would grow into one of the most consequential intelligence failures of the war, not because German analysts lacked information, but because they interpreted everything through assumptions that no longer applied. They searched for a hierarchy where there was flexibility. They searched for rigidity where there was redundancy. And they searched for control where the Americans had deliberately chosen trust. The first reports from Normandy already hinted at something unusual, though few recognized it at the time. German frontline commanders noted that American attacks lacked the visual precision they associated with elite formations. Movements appeared uneven. Units advanced at different tempos. Orders did not always produce symmetrical responses. To German eyes, trained to equate uniformity with discipline, this appeared amateurish. It confirmed pre-war expectations. Yet beneath this apparent disorder lay something deeply unsettling. American units did not collapse when plans failed. They did not halt when communications were disrupted. When German artillery severed lines, or when command posts were forced to relocate, American formations continued operating with an autonomy that contradicted German doctrine. Decisions were being made too low in the chain of command, too quickly, and with too much confidence to be dismissed as coincidence. At first, German intelligence categorized these incidents as anomalies. They attributed them to local initiative, to aggressive individuals acting outside doctrine, or to simple luck. But as engagements multiplied, the pattern became impossible to ignore. American units reacted to unexpected developments with speed that German commanders believed should require higher approval. Artillery fire adjusted rapidly, often within minutes. Armored support appeared not as an afterthought, but as an integrated response. Air attacks arrived with an unsettling sense of timing, as if the battlefield itself were communicating directly with pilots overhead. German intelligence officers began to encounter a problem they were not trained to solve. They could not locate the center of control. In German doctrine, control was visible. It had a physical presence. Command posts, staff officers, maps, telephones, and clear chains of authority formed the backbone of operational coherence. Destroy the command, and the unit would falter. Disrupt communications, and coordination would unravel. This principle had guided German operations for years. But American coordination did not behave this way. German efforts to isolate American units produced unexpected results. Formations that should have become vulnerable instead adapted. When one axis of advance stalled, another compensated. When pressure mounted, American responses did not slow. They accelerated. This created a growing sense among German commanders that they were fighting an enemy whose reactions were faster than their own ability to interpret events. This was not merely frustrating. It was psychologically destabilizing. German intelligence analysts prided themselves on their ability to forecast enemy behavior. Prediction was control. When prediction failed, uncertainty crept in. And uncertainty, prolonged over weeks and months, eroded confidence at every level of command. Reports from captured German officers reveal a subtle but important shift in language during this period. Early descriptions of American troops emphasized inexperience and excess. Later reports spoke of relentlessness, density of fire, and an inability to find weak points. The Americans were no longer described as crude. They were described as difficult. That distinction mattered. The core of German confusion lay in doctrine. German military culture valued Auftragstactik, mission command, but in practice, by 1944, it had become constrained by circumstance. Losses among experienced officers, rigid defensive requirements, and collapsing fronts forced increasingly centralized control. Initiative became risky. Deviation from orders carried consequences. Flexibility, once celebrated, was now dangerous. American doctrine moved in the opposite direction. From its inception, American training assumed friction. It assumed confusion, equipment failure, miscommunication, and human error. Rather than attempting to eliminate these factors, American doctrine sought to function despite them. Officers were trained not merely to execute plans, but to interpret intent. Non-commissioned officers were empowered to act independently, not as a contingency, but as a necessity. German intelligence did not understand this cultural foundation. They interpreted American autonomy as weakness, mistaking decentralization for lack of discipline. They failed to recognize that American coordination was not the product of tight control, but shared understanding reinforced by constant communication. Radios were central to the system. Unlike German forces, which often restricted radio use to higher command levels, American units pushed communication forward. Radios were carried by junior leaders, forward observers, and liaison personnel embedded directly with frontline units. Information flowed laterally as well as vertically. This allowed American forces to react as a network rather than as isolated elements. To German observers, this appeared almost supernatural. Artillery fire arrived not after prolonged preparation, but in response to immediate need. Air support did not follow rigid timetables, but adapted to ground conditions. German attempts to mass forces were met with rapid and overwhelming firepower, often before attacks could fully develop. This created a growing sense of vulnerability. German commanders became hesitant to concentrate troops. Movement itself became dangerous. Visibility invited destruction. The battlefield no longer rewarded boldness. It punished exposure. This psychological shift was as damaging as any physical loss. German intelligence struggled to communicate this reality upward. Traditional intelligence frameworks were ill-suited to describe an enemy defined by resilience rather than brilliance. There were no decisive headquarters to target, no single doctrine to counter, no moment where the system appeared fragile. American strength did not peak. It persisted. Logistics played a decisive role in reinforcing this perception. German intelligence had always regarded logistics as a supporting function. Supplies followed success. In American operations, logistics preceded it. Fuel, ammunition, replacements, and maintenance were synchronized with operational planning to a degree German commanders found difficult to comprehend. American units did not pause to recover because recovery was continuous. To German officers, this produced the illusion of endless capacity. Even after successful defensive actions, American forces returned quickly, often stronger than before. Losses were replaced. Equipment was repaired. Momentum resumed. German intelligence reports began to reflect a growing anxiety, not over American tactics, but over American endurance. This endurance altered German decision-making. Operations that once would have been attempted aggressively were now reconsidered. Counterattacks were delayed or abandoned due to fear of rapid retaliation. German units fought defensively not because doctrine demanded it, but because the battlefield punished initiative. Fear, in this context, was rational. American coordination transformed uncertainty into pressure. It denied German forces the ability to rest, regroup, or exploit fleeting advantages. Every pause risked renewed assault. Every movement risked detection. By late 1944, German intelligence no longer sought to predict American actions precisely. Instead, they planned for worst-case scenarios. They assumed rapid response. They assumed overwhelming support. They assumed that any engagement, however limited, could escalate instantly. This was not respect. It was apprehension born of repeated exposure. The Americans did not appear invincible. They appeared inexhaustible. And that distinction mattered more. German intelligence had been trained to identify decisive moments, points where superiority could be asserted, where enemies could be broken. Against the Americans, such moments rarely appeared. Pressure did not produce collapse. It produced adaptation. This realization arrived too late to change the outcome. The German army had mastered a form of warfare optimized for speed, precision, and early decision. The American army had mastered one optimized for duration, uncertainty, and sustained coordination. In a war defined not by moments, but by months of attrition and chaos, the latter proved decisive. German intelligence did not fail because it underestimated American courage or equipment. It failed because it misunderstood American design. What German officers encountered in 1944 was not merely an opposing army, but a system engineered to function when others degraded, to absorb loss, correct error, and continue forward without requiring perfection at every level. That system inspired fear not through spectacle, but through consistency. And it is that quiet, relentless competence, observed, recorded, and ultimately feared, that endures in the American archive.